Hello, everyone. My name is Julie McVey, and this is Unordinary Made Ordinary, where we talk about extraordinary experiences of everyday people. And today we are speaking with Jim Bruton. Welcome, Jim.
Hi, Julie. How are you today?
I'm great. I'm very excited about this conversation, I will tell you.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. So before we get into the experience, would you mind sharing just a little bit about yourself, a little background
Sure,
information?
sure. Well, I live in Connecticut now, and growing up as a little boy, I was very curious about the world and all sorts of things. And I was interested in like wildlife. I was interested in science fiction, and always flipping through the popular mechanics to see when are we getting the flying saucer in the garage, or when are we going to the moon for tourism. And my dad learned how to fly when I was in elementary school, so I fell in love with aviation. So in each type of fantasy for a child that those things could represent, maybe making wildlife films one day, or maybe building my own airplane one day, or something with science fiction, like what kind of technology could I invent one day. I've gotten to realize all those dreams throughout my adulthood. So it's really been great. One of the other things that I was always interested in was God. Always asking questions about God, 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 God. My parents like, oh, just enough of the
Wow.
questions, right? And I guess you could say my near-death experience was a big step in the fulfillment of that journey. And so as part of like living out all these childhood fantasies, there was a time that I was a NBC News war correspondent over in Afghanistan, Iraq, Southeast Asia, North Africa, all over the place. And then I met a widow with 3 babies and decided to join the circus and leave that other business behind. And at some point, my new wife said, now that you don't live that adrenaline charged existence anymore, why don't you build those airplanes you're always talking about? And for me, these were very vintage designs, like World War I, 1917, 1918, and even prior to that, between the time of the Wright brothers, 1903, and let's say 1914. I said, you're right. So I did. So I built my first plane, was a World War I fighter reproduction from Germany, and it flew very well. Then I said, now that I've built my macho airplane, I can build the little whimsical Disney looking airplane. I can puff out my chest and say I did the other. So it was on my second test flight of this little teeny tiny plane on October 6, 2016, just over 5 years ago, that I lost my engine on the second pass around the airfield. And because it's a vintage design, doesn't glide real well without an engine. The more modern designs you see flying around today do. So I couldn't make it back to the airfield. There's just a lot of forested hills all around. But luckily, there was a Boy Scout camp right next to us that had a small lake, and the shape of the body of my aircraft was a little bit like a boat on the front. It curved up. I said, I'll just aim for the lake. I'll just cruise right into the lake and then just unbuckle, since it's an open cockpit plane, and swim to shore. Well, that was the plan. I did get the engine started again, but then it quit again. And so I just aimed for the lake. But what happened is I overshot the bank by about 10 feet. So in a little airplane that was essentially like a soapbox derby car with wings, I crashed into all these tree trunks at 70 miles an hour, coming to a stop at about 15 feet. And honestly, when I stopped crashing, there was no airplane left around me. It had turned to matchsticks, broke the wings off. I don't know how I didn't eat the engine, which was sitting right in front of my face.
Wow.
I ruptured both lungs, broke all my ribs. My right leg had multiple fractures. The engine battery broke loose. And I'm sure you've seen a car battery and how heavy those can be. Hit me in the back at about 70 miles an hour and tore me up there. And luckily, there was a man fishing in this Boy Scout camp. It was, again, in October, so it was closed. And that's why I like to go fishing there. It was peaceful and quiet, and except for planes crashing, nothing to bother him. And luckily, that day he had his cell phone with him. Normally, he left it in his truck, but he had it on him. So he called 911. He rushed over to see what he could do to help me. and realized, I wasn't even able to breathe. I was just gasping for air because I didn't have functioning lungs. And fortunately for me, he was a retired police officer. So he was used to seeing trauma, whether it was car accidents or maybe domestic trauma or something like that. If he'd been the type of person who just freaks out at the first sign of blood, that would have probably killed me as quickly as the plane crash itself.
Right.
Anyway, the helicopter landed, and it wasn't too hard a job to pull me out of the wreckage because, like I said, there was very little of it. And flew me up to the Hartford, Connecticut Trauma Center at the Hartford Hospital, where a waiting team of surgeons took me right in. And when my family got there, about 3 hours later, maybe, I was in a breathing machine, intubated with a tube down my throat to help me breathe and get the air, all kinds of tubing going in and coming out of me. And I'd already escaped their restraints once. So they re-restrained me. And they said, when the family got there, they said, he's got multiple 6+ hour operations coming out. And some of them only have 2% chance of success. We could lose it at any time over the next week. So we recommend just putting him into a medically induced coma. And so they agreed. And again, as best as I can guess, when they put me into a coma here, that's when my near-death experience started. If that was a true statement or not, how could I ever verify that? But I know I didn't have any memory of my crash, and I still don't either. In fact, I had to go, when I was in the hospital and they brought me my laptop, I, for fun, went back through all my emails. The last email I remember reading was actually 2 days before my crash.
Interesting.
So it's like, when I hit, it's like it knocked the memory out of me. So
knocked a couple days worth of memories out of it. It sounds
like it really
wow.
did. Plus, of course, in terms of anesthesia, coma-inducing drugs, physical shock, there's just no memory at all of being in the hospital. And of course, I was knocked out for a week. And I would say my first memory was probably a week after I came out of the coma, when they transferred me from the ICU to a rehabilitation hospital, totally different location. And when I came to, and we'll come back to the NDE itself in a moment. When I was there laying in bed, it's just the memory of the NDE came into my mind, and it just kept repeating over and over. And with each iteration, it was deeper, it was more profound, there was more of an emotional impact to it. And I'm going, what is this thing? It was pretty amazing.
Remind me, this was 5 years ago?
Almost exactly.
And so you have no memory of the crash and no memories of what was happening, no out-of-body kinds of experiences during that time.
Well, I do mean I have my near-death experience memory, but let me say this. Let me say this, which I think is an interesting way of looking at it. Obviously, the near-death experience, as it is with most people, was incredibly lucid. I mean, it was a very lucid experience. Detail, memory, just such a whole experience. Yet, on either side of that, as bookends, if you will, are periods of amnesia. And I just find that very interesting. How can you have essentially this continuum of amnesia, and right in the middle of it put a superconscious experience?
That's fascinating, right?
Strange. Well, yeah, but if you like, I could tell you about the near-death experience at this point.
I would, but before you go there, may I ask you, during your childhood and young adulthood, et cetera, you did say you were somewhat spiritual, but did you have, I would like to know a little bit about the practices, your spiritual practice before this, and if you had any kinds of spiritual experiences before this.
Sure. You're right. I was always spiritually inclined as a child. I was, I guess I would just sort of talk to God in my head or whatever. I did have a significant experience when I was 12 years old. And that was June of 1969 down in Jacksonville, Florida, in which I tried to go to church to ask my questions and had a rather interesting experience that had me never going back to that church again. We had a Cherokee Native American who was our minister, and his name is Reverend Coolidge. And I thought, well, I'll go early one day and try to ask him my questions. Well, he was so busy preparing for the sermon, I realized, no, that's not going to happen. So maybe I'll ask him afterwards. Well, as soon as the sermon was over, there's a line of people out the door wanting to shake his hand. Okay, I'm going to have to figure this out. I'll come back next week. So I went back the next week. I'm sitting in the pew and I don't see Reverend Coolidge. I see somebody else. Now, Reverend Coolidge had been there for years. Name was on the sign out front. I looked at the lady next to me. I said, "Where's Reverend Coolidge?" And she said, "Oh, we got rid of him." And I said, "Why?" He said, "Well, he did the unthinkable. He married his daughter to a black man." Remember, Florida, 1969. Do the math, right? And I remember just looking at her and thinking, I don't understand. I don't understand that at all. But don't say a word because the crazy people will kill you. Just look straight ahead. She'll think it's righteous indignation. And then of course, by then the sermon's starting, so I can't leave. I got to sit there and not listen to everything that's being said. So I went home, asked my mom, "What's up with this?" And she goes, "Yeah, I forgot to tell you. Thanks." Reverend Coolidge had two daughters who were in the music industry. One was Rita Coolidge, who was very famous back in the 60s and 70s. Her star was rising. She was with like Chris Christopherson, Waylon Jennings, but she had her own career. She was doing great. And her slightly older sister, Priscilla, had been married to Booker T of Booker T and the MGs, who, yeah, he was black, but he was also a god in the music industry. I mean, the guy could play anything. I think he opened for the Beatles. So in a very young person's way of thinking, it's like, okay, two people love music, they meet, they fall in love, they want to get married. What's the big deal? But it's interesting. The memory of that event now, basically 50 years later, was coming into my mind while I was recuperating in the hospital and thinking about my NDE. And I was like, first of all, why that particular memory? And then I realized that aspects, the impact of the near-death experience was bringing whatever the lesson was to the surface. And what it was this, and I have written chapters on this sense. I mean, I might start with that as an example, but it really goes through how it's permeated my life overall. And it's like God was saying, I'm glad you're asking all these questions about me and you want to know about me, but God made man and man made religion. And if you walk the ways of man, you're going to come out with more questions than you went in. But if you walk with me, we're going to color outside the lines. We're going to go places that everybody says you should never go to find your truth. And where I may not give you answers, I will give you understanding. Because answers give rise to purpose, which can be a very momentary benefit. Whereas understanding gives rise to meaning, and that can last a lifetime. Mm-hmm. And I would say that's one of the core messages that came out of my near-death experience anyway. And maybe that's why it called forth this memory to put it in greater focus for me. So never went back to that church. And also remember in the late 60s, this is when people were starting to talk about things like ESP. There were TV shows about it. There were movies about it. There were books about it. The Beatles were hanging around with Maharishi Mahesh Yogi. I mean, people were talking about yoga. People were starting to open up to, like me, to the dissatisfaction of traditional religion, how it just wasn't quite feeding their souls. They wanted more. They really wanted that firsthand experience in lieu of just faith. Mm-hmm. So,
yeah.
I guess you could say I just sort of very informally followed that alternate path, reading, about Buddhism, about yoga, eventually found out about Taoism. And then, a Kung Fu show came on in the 70s. So that was kind of cool because, as an adolescent boy, who doesn't like Kung Fu? But I also really love the philosophy of it too. Mm. So just carry that on a little way. And eventually I discovered this path over in India that really suited me well. And it's one that most people haven't heard of. And I was made to wait 23 years before they would let me in. And on the day I was initiated, I said, "Why the wait?" And they go, "We don't seek to increase our numbers. And you don't ever need to send us money. You don't need to call anybody here by any honorific. You don't need to recognize us on the street. You know what you need to do now to get out of the cycles of reincarnation." I said, "Great." And that was back in 93. So, it's almost as much time since that I've been on the path as I was made to wait. However, I lived according to the path. I became a vegetarian. I've been one for 44 years. I, tried to live as purely as I could. And I did have a few out-of-body experiences during that time. Two of them, interestingly, that were about 3 years apart, had to do with if you were to die right now and sort of realize, okay, I'm dead, having to deal with the people who are left behind who are grieving. Like, one came to the mausoleum in which I was buried, and there was just no way to convey to them, hey, I'm okay, I'm all right, I'm alive, I'm right here, because you don't have a physical voice to do that with. And another, same thing, but in a different place, different time. But I also had the memory of a past life in which I died, and then I had a memory of a future life in which I died. And it just leaves you like, wow, that's pretty wild. But it also, you study how you are downloading and processing this information, and there's no panic, no judgment. You're just accepting. And I think that's a real key part to swallowing some of these huge spiritual truths, huge in a relative term, I know. But as you get hit with these things, or you accept these things, just basically don't react to them. Just let them come and then let them go, whatever. And so I think that played a key role in my near-death experience. Mm-hmm. Prepared the ground, if you will.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Amazing. I did not hear about these other things you were just sharing. So, so please, yes, go on with the near-death experience. And
sure.
Yeah,
well,
love to hear it.
It's interesting. I didn't realize maybe how unusual it was until I, after my crash and I was recuperating at home, started to do my online research to realize I had a near-death experience. I knew it was an out-of-body experience, and I couldn't have told you what the differences were.
Oh, okay, interesting.
I'm not sure I could pick up on all the subtleties now, but it's definitely a near-death experience. And I guess in doing that, I realized how different it was. I did not go through the tunnel. I didn't see dead loved ones. I didn't see angelic beings. I would say I had an experience that was kind of like a life review, but one that provided me with more, as I call it, actionable intelligence, rather than just like Scrooge looking at your past life and going, wow, I could have done better. Mm-hmm. My experience was more about seeing the fruits, seeing the choices that were emerging as a result of my past actions, and being given the opportunity to essentially remove bad choices from my future, so they wouldn't be there to tempt me. And I kind of call it like stacking the deck. I mean, think about it. We represented every day with all sorts of choices. Some we could say are better, some are neutral, some might be well-intended but wrong, and then some of them could just be outright bad. So my goal was my mission, I guess, while I was there, was to try and remove the bad ones. So let me back this up a second.
Yes, please.
So again, without going through a tunnel, it's like so when my near-death experience started, it was like I was teleported instantly to this post-apocalyptic landscape. I basically appeared on this terrace of a very tall building in a city that I could only describe as having been destroyed a long time ago, maybe 1,000 years ago. I just don't know, by a nuclear blast or by a meteor strike or something like that. It was absolutely dead. And these huge dark clouds were hovering over my head, like the mother of all storms was getting ready to unload. It was very much a sense of, I don't want to say foreboding, but a sense of something big is getting ready to happen. And then all of a sudden I got hit by a wave of nausea in my stomach. And I pretty much just doubled over and held my stomach. I said, I don't think I can stand this. And when I said that, and in my head, it's like I'm saying it out loud, who knows, right? I heard the sound off to my left, and I looked over and I saw this tall egg-shaped sculpture. Maybe it was like 4 or 5 stories high, maybe like 50 feet high.
Mhm.
But it was made out of open lattice work. And because it was open lattice work, you know, you could see through it. And when I looked, I could see these slight movements within. So I thought, wow, what is that? So it was the most interesting thing to look at in the whole
Feel
landscape.
free to refer to your painting.
Yeah, right
behind
over
you.
my shoulder is
For those who are watching this on video, yeah.
Yeah, is a depiction of it. I composited that from 3 different elements. The cityscape was a frame from a movie. The clouds were actually over New York 3 years ago when tornadoes were terrorizing the area. And the egg is carved with a laser, and I actually have a copy of that in my other room. So I thought, yep, this really articulates what I saw pretty well. And what's interesting is when I composited this image and I sent it off to this company that prints it on canvas, the director of marketing actually called me and said, talk to me about this picture. I know there's something about going on. And so I told him my entire near-death experience. Like, talk about being tuned in, right?
Yes.
So
And
anyway,
so you were physical when you were in this experience, a
it's not
solid
like
body?
well, it's not like I looked down and saw my hands or anything like that, really. I mean, it's like right now, without looking, you know, you've got hands, right? You know, you have feet. So it's just like that. You're there and you're functioning in the environment in I'd say a normal way. It's not like I needed to levitate over to the egg. It's not like I swam over to the egg. I just, in my mind, I walked over to the egg.
Okay.
Whether I had a physical body or not, who knows? But we've all heard, I mean, you know, when we recognize dead loved ones, they look like the physical beings we knew here. How else would we recognize them? I do know that when children have questioned angelic beings, sometimes they have asked, is this your real form? And sometimes the angelic being just turns into a ball of light.
Yeah.
It's kind of a continuum on that experience plane. So anyway, I made my way over to the egg. And as I looked through that lattice, I could see inside, just sort of freely suspended in space, these particular gears called sector gears. Now, when you think of a gear, you might think of a typical gear you've seen. It's like a circle with little teeth all the way around it. They connect with another one and they turn around. A sector gear is a portion of that gear. It's like just a pie slice, if you will.
Okay.
And you usually see it in clock-like mechanisms. You might even see it in transmissions, but their whole idea is, because it's just a section, it has a beginning, a middle, and an end to its sweep.
Sure.
That's significant.
Okay.
Because when I looked at them, some were very much in focus. Some were out of focus. And it was kind of like really messing with my eyes. And they were just sort of idling, moving slow, like they were idling, like they weren't really doing anything right then, just slowly moving. And sometimes they would just pass through each other, even if one was definite and one was not. And I remember thinking, this is really weird looking. And but if I looked at one, whether it was in, you know, as I call it, in focus or out of focus, a video feed played in my head of what it represented. And I realized after a few of these are events in my future, because I might look older, or I might see my children older with their own children, things like that. And so I accepted all this, and of course, I wanted to see, can I touch any of these? You know, because I'm curious, you know, can I touch the definite ones, but the ghostly ones I can't feel? So I put my hand through the lattice work. And then one of these gears, and just gently passing, brushed by my hand. And when it did, I was racked again with nausea. And like a reflex, I grabbed it and pulled it out through the lattice work and threw it away. Just, I don't know. It was like, you know, like if a mosquito bit you, you might you know, flick it off or something. So I did that. And when I did that, all of the gears started spinning around again. And I realized they were compensating for the loss of one. And then I said, what's going on? What is this? And from that moment on, throughout my experience, a disembodied voice spoke to me and stayed with me.
May I ask, during this time, did you know that you were, where did you think you were? Did you think you were dead or having do you remember what you felt like you knew, or dream, or?
I was so present.
You're so present, you didn't
that
think about
I
that.
just accepted what was in front of me.
Gotcha.
And you're asking a really great question that I can speak to in more detail. in just a moment.
Okay.
Like in about 2 seconds.
Okay.
because I said, what is this? And it said, this is the future birthing into the now. This is the process of becoming. And I said, what is it I'm looking at? And it said, these are all events in your future. And I said, well, how did I know I could remove that one future? And it literally said, why else are you here? I'm thinking, I don't know. And it said, I said, I don't even know where here is. I don't know where I'm at. And it said, you're in the impossible now. And I said, well, what do you mean impossible now? I said, it's impossibly thin and impossibly wide across multiverses. It's another word for now.
Okay.
And
the eternal now. I've heard that phrase.
It's the exact same thing as the eternal now. It was just, for some reason, I was hearing it as the impossible now, because, and I'll tell you why it's impossible. And I'm jumping ahead a second, but I'll come back. When I was trying to understand my near-death experience, I actually found more understanding through studying, and I'll call it consumer grade quantum physics, than my Eastern mysticism books. And I think that that really was brought to a head when Max Planck was considered to be the father of quantum physics. Believe it or not, he was born before the Civil War. So to think of us in horse and carriage thinking about quantum physics is mind-blowing to me. Anyway, there's a unit of time. You know how in physics we have units of measurement to describe the wavelength of light or the size of an atom or an electron, things like that. In quantum physics, there's a unit of measurement. It has to, I guess, be the smallest unit of time. It's called Planck time. It's 10 to the minus 44 seconds, which is 100 millionth of a trillionth of a trillionth of a trillionth of a second. That's about as short as it gets. To me, that's the moment of time I was standing within.
Okay.
That says now. Okay. So I guess I'm asking more about, what I'm looking at, what's going on. And at some point, I understood that I was there to keep feeling around inside the egg and identify these experiences in my future that they caused me pain right now. Those were to my spiritual detriment in my future. And then I was able to remove them, the whole thing recycled around again, and then I would search around again.
Okay.
And so this conversation is kind of going on, I guess you could say, while I'm doing this. And I remember one time I said, where are the gears that feel good? And it said, you're not here to feel good. It wasn't a threatening statement. It was just like,
you'd want to keep those, I would think, anyway, not throw those out.
You want to keep the good ones, right? Exactly. And it's kind of like, going to, it's like if a bus went to Disney World, right? 10 people get off. 5 want to ride every ride there is. And guides will show up to take them on every ride. But maybe the other 5 are standing there with wrenches in their hands saying, I want to go behind the scenes and look at all the gears, look at all the pistons, and I want to make things work better. Disney World for a totally different reason. And it's not to have fun. It's to make things work better.
Okay.
And so that, in a way, was the difference between being there to have a good time and being there to essentially work.
I keep thinking, is your experience, do you think, related to because of the how your mind works personally, in this present life, being, mechanically inclined and whatnot?
Its representation to me was, I would agree with you, it was very specific. And one of the things I realized is that here in the common day world, we see life through the filters we want. If you're going out on a big first date, you stand there and look at the mirror and you go, yeah, right. If you're starting a new school and you're a little nervous, you look in the mirror and you think, I'm going to be fine. Everything's going to be fine. If you're going to a big interview or you're starting a new job, you look in the mirror and you want to feel like you're looking at the most competent person, the best choice they made.
Sure. Right.
Over on the other side, though, we see life through the filters we need. And that's like looking in the mirror of truth. And
Mm.
we say warts and all, but could also say light as well. From warts to light, we see everything about us, and you can never unsee that. It
Mm.
will affect you to your core, and it's very humbling. I mean, people say, "Wow, I realized I'm light." Yeah, but there's something about the delivery system that is incredibly humbling. I'm not saying I'm humble, but I'm saying I was. I was humbled, and so anyway, as I continued doing this, we were talking about right and wrong, and I said, right and wrong are variables over which you have no control, that you may not know something is wrong until after it's passed. Better is it to essentially trust to the grand design, trust to the fact that things fit and refit together. And basically, I guess you could say, in seeing all of the gears cycle and recycle again every time I removed one of these possible futures, that was seeing how the design fits and refits together. That was organically learning how to have faith in the grand design. As a result, I don't pray, because let's face it, a lot of people pray for the wrong things. Like, I want more money. I want, I've been smoking all my life. Please don't let me die from lung cancer. A lot of people are praying to be saved from their bad choices. Not everybody, I understand that. But to a great extent, it gets a little tiring to hear what people do pray for. And if I need to pray to God to say, I do have a mortgage to pay next month, I really need that money, that to me is a crisis of faith. I'm sure God knows I have a mortgage. I'm sure God knows everything I want, and He knows everything I need. And so I try to, instead of praying for what I want, I would say the only thing I would want is that my will be one with God's. And instead, when we're on that sine wave, we chase joy and we try to not chase sorrow, and then it's back to joy and back to sorrow. Running down the very middle is the main axis of which up and down occur. And that main axis to me is acquiescence, the acceptance of whatever comes. And you can find that that's the way to be in the Bhagavad Gita, in the Tao Te Ching, in all the Buddhist sutras. Everything is about just accept what comes, because none of it is you, and it's always changing. And a lot of it is, like I said, the fruit of your past choices. In the end, no one can take from you what is not theirs to take. And you cannot receive from anyone what is not yours to receive. Everything is as it should be.
So going back to the gears, I keep looking at the painting and imagining you doing this, you only took out future negative possibilities, but you couldn't, I don't know how you could, but you couldn't go into the present and you couldn't go into the past and take out negative things and change the present, for example.
Right. It said, because at some point it said to me, I questioned what was going on. And it said, when it said you're in the impossible now, I said, that makes no sense. It said, all right, well, can you remember the world to which your body belongs? And I really thought, and I said, nope, can't.
Oh.
And in that moment, if someone had come up and said, if you stay here any longer, you can't go back, I say, go back where? To your family. What family? Okay. And this is when later on I realized I had been depersonalized down to zero. I had no personality. Of course, I don't want to say I didn't have an ego, because that opens up, a can of worms, and we would get a lot of questions that I don't really want to have.
But you didn't know who you were? You had no identity?
I was just a conscious being, and that's all I was, a conscious being.
But you could see the future when you were looking in here, but not the past.
Because those future choices had been assigned to this conscious being, even though they would be realized back here. And so it's almost like taking a car into the shop, to get it fixed. You might turn the engine on and make it run while you work on it, but it's not going anywhere, right? And you're not driving it anywhere. It's just getting fixed. And so that's kind of like what it was. And at one point I said, when I was removing all these gears, it's like I turned around and saw this huge pile of gears. I said, looks like if I don't have a bad future, I have no future at all. And it said, your number of breaths are already counted. I will worry about your last one. And for those who make poor use of their choices, offering fewer possibilities could be called mercy. And at one point, it said, everything is interconnected, and pay more attention to your relationships. Be gentle with everyone as I am gentle with you. And I remember thinking, what's gentle about all this? And it said, your being here is basically an answer to one of your prayers. And now the man who fell from the sky is not the same who flew into it. And with that, booted me out.
Okay. Do you remember now some of the bad choices that you took out?
Nope.
You don't remember?
I only remember seeing two drift by. And one has come to pass, the other has yet to come to pass.
Ooh.
But again, when I was remarking, I'm not going to say I didn't know at the time, but I think maybe I'm not allowed to remember, because I did say, how do I, other than pain, because I said, I feel bad that I'm not using some scripture or mantra or religious idol as a guide to making these choices. I'm only using pain. That's a really humbling thing, right? Like, wow, I got a lot of pain in here. I must have made a lot of bad choices or committed a lot of bad actions in my past. And it said that's when it said that the answers to what comes tomorrow are a waste. And that's when it said, right and wrong. That's when it said, right and wrong are variables over which you have no control. Just trust in the grand design. And for me, that meant just remove the bad choices that are in your future, so that the only choices you're presented with are not the ones that can bring out the worst in you, the ones that would tempt you beyond what you can bear. And it's kind of like the analogy, if I was an alcoholic and I was desperately trying to stay sober and I walked to work, I might not want to walk by the bar. I hear glasses tinkling, I hear whiskey getting poured, I hear laughter, and I think, it'd be so nice to go in there and just do that, right?
Sure.
Maybe now I want to walk by where they make, manufacture towels or something like that, something very mundane, and just avoid those things in which I could be tempted beyond my ability to resist.
It's such a unique experience. Have you met anyone now that I know you've been doing interviews and sharing this for years. Have you met anyone that has had a similar experience, either out of body or near-death experience like this?
I'm going to say no. However, a person reached out to me one time and said, I've just heard your podcast. You might want to read this person's experience. And it was on the Ender Near-Death Experience Research Foundation site. And it was, it literally just says their last name, Wilson. And so I read it, and it came pretty close, in terms of mechanically, if you will.
Really? Very interesting.
Kind of, but whereas I saw an egg with gears, he saw this big like paddle wheel. Like on a paddle wheel boat or something like that. But it was like on its side, spinning around, coming across a pasture. And when it came up to him, all of the paddles as they were hitting him were all alternate lives. And so he was instantly all these different lives that fast.
Wow.
And what's weird is when I read it, emotionally, it took me right back to my experience. I mean, I was out driving around I just read it and went for a drive. And it was almost like I had vertigo while I was driving. It was really strange. And it totally, it hit hard. So, and that's the only one I've ever.
Wow. We're already, if you can believe this, running out of time. And I had so many other questions, such as, what are your feelings about death now? How did this affect your relationships? These are important questions. And I'm thinking you've written a couple books now.
Yeah, I've written 2 books because I was told I was in the in-between. The first book is called The In-Between, A Trip of a Lifetime. I guess I could have called it Back by Popular Demand, but that's for my stand-up comedy routine one day. And then the second book is Well, I was being asked after a lot of these interviews, how do we put this into practice for ourselves in terms of the unique perspectives you have now?
Right.
So I thought about that, wrote about that, and that book is called The Practice in Between, The Art of Letting Go. And that's very much about applying things.
Okay. And of course, we're going to put all these links up in the description so people can get these and connect with you. Yeah,
I was going to say, I also have a website, inbetweenproductions.com, and that's productions with an S, inbetweenproductions.com, where I recount my near-death experience. There's also a media page, where
okay, cool.
Your past podcasts, and I'll post this one to it as well.
Okay, great. Can I ask you one more question, and then I do want you to feel free to share anything that's on your heart that is resonating with you right now that you feel you want to share with the listeners. But are you happy this happened? What are there benefits to your life that you feel like you wouldn't want to give up?
That's an excellent question. A few months after my crash, a friend of mine who lives in New York said, "Hey, come in and I want to hear about your experience." I said, "Okay." And she was friends with a woman who was the vice president of the American Psychical Association or Society. William James, who was a famous psychologist at the end of the 1800s, actually founded this when people were wanting to take paranormal events very seriously and conduct research. And when I met, she said, "On that day that you crashed, did you have a bad premonition?" I said to her, "Well, that's a perfect question coming from you." And I said, "No. But as you ask that question, I feel moved by the in-between to answer it this way, that if I forget premonition, if I had had full foreknowledge of what was going to have happened, would I have had the guts to get into the cockpit anyway?"
Yeah.
Because if God says, "I need to spend some one-on-one time with you," what price is too big to pay? And yet, would we have the courage to show up? And so I would say this, and I said, maybe I can't answer that question the way I know I'm supposed to just yet, but being able to ask it is enough. But I would say this, that for all the physical injury I suffered, for all the change in my relationships that have followed, it was absolutely worth it. Absolutely worth it.
Wow.
If somebody said you could go back and erase that and you could have your normal life and you'd still be flying your planes, and no, this was totally worth it.
Wow. Yeah, that's an interesting
Well,
question.
Have you noticed that when you talk to people who have NDEs, usually what delivers us to the door of that experience is not that great. It might be a heart attack, it might be a car crash or plane crash or drowning.
Yeah.
It's something that's not really that pleasant. But it's interesting when they talk about their near-death experience and what happened to deliver them to it. It's interesting how the near-death experience is the main part of the story, and the delivery mechanism is almost a footnote. It's almost like people have to bring out, "Well, wait, tell us about that plane crash." You go, yeah, I crashed the plane. I want to get to the good part of the story. And then people are going, because without the near-death experience, the plane crash is the climax of the story.
Right.
Now it is no more important than just a footnote.
Right. Wow.
I know, right? I mean, I hear how it sounds, and it's like, it's so different. But, as I mentioned, digesting everything that happened and understanding this was a near-death experience, being able to share it, coherently, like we're doing right now. I would say it's interesting. My writing my books and these types of interviews are really a lot about living the integration phase out loud, very publicly, saying, here are the challenges, and here are the uncertainties, here are the ambiguities. I would say this, that when I was researching it, I realized that there's a regular people national divorce rate of about 53%. And for NDEers, 78%. And I have found that to personally be true. And, you realize too, I mean, it's not like there are any good or bad people here. They're just people sometimes who are just overwhelmed, and they're trying to understand. And also, not every non-experiencer can sign up for that journey, because you change, once you've had this experience, you change so much that it introduces an ambiguity into the relationship, and not too many relationships welcome such an ambiguity that leaves the non-experiencer saying, where do I fit into this?
Absolutely.
What do I do? And it's not like you can really say, because every day you're going through this new self-discovery, asking yourself, is what was true yesterday still true today? And a lot of times it's not. You are evolving and changing, and you have a different set of values, and you also have a different way of determining friends. It's interesting, like the first and one and only IANS, the International Association of Near-Death Studies conference I went to, which was just before COVID. It was interesting, there were 500 strangers there, and yet every time we looked at each other, there was a hint of recognition. And then next thing you know, all the couches in the lobby are filled with all these people who are meeting for the first time, just sitting down talking about their intimate details. And I said, it's like indie ears don't need an introduction. It's like we immediately recognize we're from a different planet, and we're sitting down comparing notes on living on planet Earth. It's the strangest experience I ever had. So the integration phase, they say, could last 7 to 10 years, but I think sometimes it can last for a lifetime. And I think I'm one of those people. So just still working through everything, understanding what those changes are and how I am now. But I'm grateful again. I'm grateful for the change, and I'm grateful for the journey. I'm grateful to be able to share it with you today, Julie.
Well, thank you. Thank you. I so appreciate you for doing this, for being here. It's been so fascinating. I'm sure I could talk to you for another hour about all kinds of things related to this. So again, thank you to Jim Bruton for sharing this amazing experience and ongoing experiences with us. Thank you all for watching. I appreciate that. This has been Julie McVey with Unordinary Made Ordinary, and I do hope you'll join us next time for another fascinating interview. If you did enjoy the video, the interview, please give it a thumbs up, of course. And if you like this type of content, please subscribe and hit the bell icon so you can be alerted of future videos. And I hope you're having a wonderful day or evening wherever you are on the planet or off the planet, as I say, and take care. Bye-bye.